The sun was just beginning to rise above the wide Arizona desert, painting the sky with soft orange and pink colors. The wind moved slowly across the dry land, carrying the sound of distant birds and the rustling of desert plants. It was quiet, but beneath that calm a storm was growing in the life of a young woman named Nalin. Nalin belonged to the Apache people. She had been born in a small camp near the river, where her family taught her to respect the land and live with courage. Her mother had always said that strength was not only in the hands but also in the heart. Nalin grew up listening to the old stories told around the fire. Stories of brave women and wise men who protected their people. Stories about dignity, kindness, and hope. As she grew older, Nalin began to feel that her path was not the same as others around her. Many girls in her village married young, helped raise families, and stayed close to home. But Nalin dreamed of learning new things, meeting different people, and seeing what lay beyond the hills. She was curious about the world outside her camp. She was different, and she knew it. When she turned 18, Nalin left her village to work at a trading post near a small settlement. It was a long and dusty road, but she walked it with quiet determination. She found work sorting supplies, selling cloth, and helping travelers who came through. Her careful way of speaking and gentle kindness made her well liked by many. She didn't talk much about where she came from, but her dark hair, deep eyes, and calm strength told her story without words. Life at the trading post was not easy, but it gave her something she never had before, a small piece of freedom. She earned her own money. She made her own choices. She watched people from all kinds of places come and go, each with a different story. Sometimes she listened quietly. Sometimes she shared her own thoughts. And sometimes she just stood at the door at night, looking out at the stars and feeling something deep inside her, the feeling of belonging to the world. But peace can be fragile, especially when a person stands apart from what is expected. Nalin's choice to leave her village had upset some people. There were whispers among certain groups who believed she should not have gone. They said she was turning her back on old ways. They said she had forgotten who she was. None of that was true, but whispers have a way of growing louder even when they are wrong. One day, a group of travelers arrived at the trading post. Among them was a man from a powerful family within her tribe. He carried himself with pride and expected everyone to listen to him. He approached Nalin with a smile, but behind that smile was something cold. He told her she should return with them. He said there was a place prepared for her, a life already decided. But Nalin, who had found courage in her quiet heart, refused. She spoke softly, but her words were firm. "I have made my own path," she said. "I will walk where I choose." The man didn't like her answer. His smile faded. His eyes grew hard. He left without another word, but his silence was louder than any threat. From that moment, Nalin felt something shift around her. Some people who used to smile now avoided her. The wind seemed heavier. The nights felt longer. She tried to ignore it. She kept working at the trading post, helping the old woman who owned it. But deep down, she felt a coldness following her like a shadow. She began to sleep lightly, always listening for footsteps outside. She didn't tell anyone what had happened that day. She didn't want to worry the kind people who gave her work. Weeks passed. The whispers didn't stop. Travelers brought quiet news from distant places. News about people who were angry, about words spoken against her. They said she had disrespected important people. Nalin lowered her head, but inside she stood tall. She had done nothing wrong. She had only chosen to live her life in peace. Then, one evening as the sun went down, Nalin stood by the small river behind the trading post. The air was warm and still. She could hear the soft trickle of the water. For a moment she closed her eyes and remembered her mother's voice. "A brave heart does not shout. It walks silently and stands strong." She whispered those words to herself again and again as if they could hold her together. That night, she returned to her small room behind the shop. She lit a single lantern and sat by the window. The stars were bright, but her thoughts were heavy. She began to understand that the life she had built here was slowly being surrounded by something she couldn't see but could feel, like a cloud closing in around her. She still helped travelers the next day. She still smiled at children passing by, but inside she began to plan. She didn't know where she would go or how far she might have to walk, but she knew she couldn't simply wait for trouble to find her. Nalin wasn't someone who ran away. But she wasn't someone who would let her life be decided for her either. One morning, as she walked to the front of the shop, she noticed two men watching her from across the street. They didn't speak. They just stood there, arms folded, their eyes following her every move. She felt a chill travel down her spine. She turned away and tried to focus on her work. But the feeling didn't leave her. That night, the old woman who owned the trading post handed Nalin a warm cup of tea and said softly, "I've seen the way you look at the road lately, like someone waiting for a storm." Nalin lowered her eyes. She didn't want to worry the woman who had shown her kindness. But she also couldn't lie. "I think the road is already bringing the storm," she whispered. The old woman placed a gentle hand over hers. "Then you must be the one who walks through it with courage," she said. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension. The desert, once open and endless, now felt smaller. Every sound in the night made Nalin's heart beat faster. She could sense that something was coming closer, something she could not name, but she could feel. She remembered the stories from her childhood, about people who faced fear not by shouting or fighting, but by standing strong. She tried to be one of them. Every morning she braided her hair carefully, tied her shawl around her shoulders, and walked to the shop with her head held high. She did not let anyone see her fear, but the truth was, she was alone. She had no family here. No one from her village would stand with her. And those who once greeted her kindly now stayed silent. That kind of silence can be heavier than any loud voice. It can make the world feel colder. Then one late afternoon, as the sky grew soft with the fading light, Nalin made a quiet choice. She packed a small bag with a piece of bread, a water gourd, and a thin blanket. She didn't know where the road would lead, but she decided she would follow it. If the storm was coming, she would meet it with her own steps, not wait for it to find her standing still. She left a note for the old woman who had cared for her, thanking her for everything. She stood at the edge of the settlement, looking out at the long, empty road stretching into the desert. For a moment, her heart trembled, but then she remembered her mother's words again, steady and strong in her mind. She took her first step forward. The night was quiet. The stars watched from above. Somewhere in the darkness, shadows moved, but Nalin walked on, her heart steady even when her hands trembled. She didn't know that this journey would bring her to the ranch of a man named Samuel Carter. She didn't know that their lives would soon be tied together in ways neither of them could have imagined. But at that moment, all she knew was that she was walking toward a future of her own making. And even though she walked alone, she carried a quiet strength inside her, stronger than any whisper. The road stretched far and empty as Nalin walked through the desert night. The sky was a deep blue covered with 1,000 shining stars. The air was cool, and the soft sound of her steps mixed with the quiet rustling of desert plants. She walked slowly, careful not to lose her way. The lantern light from the settlement was far behind her now, only a faint memory in the distance. Nalin did not know exactly where she was going. She only knew she needed to keep moving forward. Each step was a promise to herself, a promise that she would not let fear make her turn back. She whispered small prayers under her breath, not asking for miracles but for strength to keep walking. By morning, the sun began to rise again, soft and golden. Her feet were tired and her throat was dry, but her spirit remained steady. She passed through open fields and quiet hills. Birds moved in the sky above her and small creatures crossed the path before her. She felt both alone and watched over at the same time, as if the desert itself understood her journey. As the sun climbed higher, Nalin noticed something ahead. A thin line of smoke rose into the air far beyond a small hill. It wasn't the kind of smoke that came from a fire meant for harm. It was steady and calm, the kind of smoke that came from a cooking pot or a warm home. She stopped for a moment, shaded her eyes with her hand, and looked closer. Her heart beat a little faster. She knew she was close to someone's land. She wondered if she should turn away or move forward. She didn't want to bring her troubles to anyone else's door, but she was tired, and her water was almost gone. The desert could be kind during the day, but it could also be dangerous at night if she had no place to rest. Finally, she took a deep breath and kept walking toward the smoke. The path led her down a gentle slope to a wide stretch of land. A wooden fence surrounded fields of grass where a few horses moved slowly. In the distance, she saw a small house made of wood, with a porch and a roof that looked worn but strong. A few tools leaned against the wall and a dog rested in the shade, its tail gently tapping the ground. This was the home of Samuel Carter. Samuel had built this ranch with his own hands years earlier. He was a quiet man, someone who didn't talk more than he needed to. His days were filled with caring for his animals, fixing fences, and working in the sun. Many people in the nearby towns knew his name, not because he was loud or important, but because he was steady, like a rock in the middle of a storm. He didn't like trouble, and he didn't go looking for it. But life has a way of finding people when they least expect it. That morning, Samuel was carrying a bucket of water to the horses when he saw something unusual near the far edge of his land. At first it looked like a shape moving slowly across the field. He shaded his eyes against the sun and stepped closer. As the figure came nearer, he realized it was a woman, walking carefully, her clothes dusty, her steps uneven. She looked like someone who had been traveling for a long time. Samuel set the bucket down and walked to the fence. The wind moved through the grass as she approached. She looked tired, but there was something strong in the way she held herself. She didn't look down. She didn't stumble. She walked like someone who had learned how to keep going even when the road was hard. When she reached the fence, she stopped and took a small breath. Her lips were dry and her face was warm from the sun. Samuel stood a few feet away, not speaking at first. He wasn't the kind of man who liked to ask questions before he understood the moment. Finally, in a calm voice, he said, "You've come a long way." Nolan nodded. She didn't have many words left in her throat. "Yes," she whispered. Samuel studied her quietly. He could see she wasn't a threat. Her hands were empty, her steps careful. He could also see something else. A tiredness in her eyes that wasn't just from walking. It was the kind of tiredness that came from carrying a heavy story. He pointed to the well near the barn. "You should drink some water." For a moment she hesitated. She wasn't used to strangers offering kindness. But his voice didn't carry any sharpness, only a quiet steadiness. So she nodded again and walked toward the well. She leaned down, cupped her hands, and drank slowly. The cool water touched her lips like a small gift. She closed her eyes for a brief second, letting the moment settle in her heart. Samuel stayed near the fence, watching carefully but not pressing her with questions. He could tell she wasn't ready to talk, and he was not a man who needed every story told right away. When she finished drinking, she sat down near the wooden post, letting her tired legs rest. "Where are you headed?" Samuel asked after a while, his voice gentle. She shook her head. "I don't know," she answered softly. "Just away." Samuel understood those words. He had once been a man trying to walk away from something, too. That was years ago, before he bought this land and made it his home. Sometimes people don't need to run towards something. They just need to walk away first. He didn't ask for details. Instead, he offered, "You can rest here for a while. There's a shed near the barn." "It's quiet." Nellen looked at him with surprise. She had expected suspicion, maybe coldness. But instead there was simple kindness. It wasn't loud. It wasn't heavy with questions. It was steady, like the earth beneath her feet. She felt something she hadn't felt in many days. A small piece of safety. She thanked him quietly, her voice almost too soft to hear. He nodded once, like a man who didn't need big words to understand gratitude. The rest of the day passed slowly. Samuel went back to his chores, fixing a fence and feeding his animals. Nalin stayed near the shed, resting her feet and drinking more water. The dog who lived on the ranch wandered near her, sniffing curiously before lying down in the shade again. The horses moved gently in the field, and the sun stretched across the sky like a golden blanket. As the day turned to evening, Samuel brought her a small plate of bread and stew. "It's not much," he said, "but it's warm." She accepted it with both hands. The smell of warm food made her eyes sting with quiet emotion. She hadn't eaten a real meal in days. She took small bites, as if trying to make the moment last longer. Samuel didn't sit too close. He stayed by the porch, giving her space, but his presence was calm and solid. After a long silence, Nalin spoke. Her voice was soft but steady. "You don't know me," she said, "and still you help me." Samuel looked at her for a moment. "I don't need to know someone to offer a bit of kindness," he replied. "The desert is hard enough. A person shouldn't have to walk it alone." Those simple words touched her deeply. She lowered her eyes and held the warm bowl a little tighter. In that quiet, something shifted between them. Not a promise, not a bond, just the beginning of trust, like the first small flame on a cold night. That night, the stars filled the sky once more. Nalin lay inside the small shed, wrapped in a blanket Samuel had given her. For the first time in many days, her body relaxed. Her breathing slowed. She could still feel the weight of the shadows she carried. But here, in this quiet place, it felt a little lighter. Outside, Samuel sat on the porch, listening to the soft sound of the wind moving through the trees. He didn't know who she really was or what she was running from. But something in his heart told him that their meeting was not by chance. Sometimes life brings two paths together, not with loud signs, but with quiet steps. As Nalin closed her eyes, she whispered a small prayer again. But this time her voice carried a tiny spark of hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew that tonight she wasn't alone anymore. And that for now was enough. The morning sun rose slowly over the wide desert land, bringing a soft light that touched everything with a golden glow. The air was cool and fresh, and the soft sound of birds filled the quiet space around the ranch. Nalin woke up to the gentle warmth of the sun on her face. For a few moments she forgot everything, forgot the shadows that had followed her, forgot the whispers, forgot the long walk through the dark road. For a few moments it was just her, the smell of the earth and the sound of the wind brushing against the wooden walls of the shed. She sat up slowly, wrapping the thin blanket around her shoulders. Samuel was already outside, working with quiet movements as if the land and he understood each other without words. He moved with a steady pace, feeding the animals and fixing a loose board on the fence. He didn't look surprised to see her awake. He simply nodded in greeting, the same way he had done the day before. "Morning," he said in his calm voice. "Morning," she replied softly. There was something about his quiet nature that made it easy to breathe around him. He didn't look at her with suspicion. He didn't question her with sharp eyes. He simply accepted that she was there, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. After she washed her face at the well, Samuel handed her a small piece of bread and a cup of warm tea. She held it carefully, feeling the warmth travel through her fingers. It had been a long time since someone had shared something this simple and kind with her. She thanked him with a small smile. He didn't say anything in return, just gave a short nod before turning back to his chores. The day moved slowly, like the quiet rhythm of the ranch itself. Nalin began to help Samuel with simple tasks, not because he asked, but because she wanted to. She brushed one of the horses, carried a bucket of water, and picked a few dry branches from the ground. It wasn't much, but it made her feel useful. It reminded her of a time long ago when life felt lighter. Samuel noticed her efforts but didn't stop her. He simply worked alongside her, letting the silence between them be soft, not heavy. When he finally spoke, it was about small things. The weather, the horses, the way the wind carried the scent of rain even when the sky was clear. He didn't ask about her past. He didn't ask why she was here. That quiet respect meant more to her than she could say. But even as she worked, a small voice inside her reminded her of the world outside the ranch. It reminded her that the shadows she left behind had not disappeared. They were simply waiting. She tried to push those thoughts away, but they stayed like a cold wind at the edge of her heart. In the afternoon, Samuel noticed her distant eyes. He leaned against the fence and said quietly, "You're looking far away." She looked at him, surprised by how simply he saw through her silence. "Some roads," she said softly, "follow you even when you leave them behind." He didn't ask what she meant. He just gave a slow nod, like someone who understood more than he spoke. "Then we'll make sure this road doesn't scare you," he said. Those words stayed with her. In the days that followed, Nalin and Samuel fell into a quiet rhythm. She helped with the animals in the garden. He fixed the fence and worked on the small stable. In the evenings, they sat on the porch watching the sun sink below the horizon. They didn't need many words. The silence between them was peaceful, but the world outside the ranch didn't remain quiet forever. It started with a stranger's wagon passing by the dirt road one late afternoon. Samuel was fixing a loose gate when he saw the wagon slow down, its driver looking toward the house a little too long. Samuel wasn't a man who liked to imagine trouble where there was none, but he had lived long enough to know when something didn't feel right. He said nothing to Nalin at that moment, but he kept it in the back of his mind. The next day, Nalin noticed a group of riders far in the distance. They didn't come close, but their silhouettes stood like shadows against the sunlight. Her chest tightened. She recognized the way they moved, the way they paused, the way they looked. These were not travelers passing through. They were watchers. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't want to bring worry into the only place where she had felt safe in weeks, but Samuel saw the change in her eyes. After she carried a bucket to the barn, he spoke quietly. "Who are they?" he asked, not as an accusation, but as someone who needed to understand. She lowered her head, unsure of how to put her past into words. "They're from a place I left," she said softly. "They think I owe them something, but I don't." Samuel didn't press her for more. He didn't ask for details she wasn't ready to share. He only said, "Well, this land is mine, and no one here owes anyone anything." Something warm and steady filled the space between his words. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but to Nalan it felt like a quiet promise. She didn't have many people in her life who had stood beside her. Hearing those words made her heart feel both heavy and light at the same time. That evening, Samuel began making small changes around the ranch. He checked the locks on the barn doors. He made sure the fences were in good shape. He wasn't expecting trouble, but he was preparing the way a man does when he understands that life can turn suddenly, like wind changing direction. Nalan noticed, and she began to help. She tied new ropes to the posts, carried extra buckets of water inside, and made sure the lanterns had enough oil to last through the night. She didn't want to be someone who only received kindness. She wanted to be someone who stood beside it. The dog, who had once been lazy and quiet, began to bark more often in the nights that followed. His ears perked at sounds coming from the far edge of the land. Sometimes it was nothing but the wind, but sometimes it wasn't. Shadows moved along the road, quiet but not invisible. Samuel kept his voice calm, but his eyes grew sharper. Nalan felt it too, the soft pull of something nearing them, like the air before a summer storm. But in that quiet tension, something beautiful also began to grow. Each night, as they sat on the porch, Nalan began to share small pieces of her story. Not everything at once, just enough to let him see the weight she carried. She told him about her village, about how she loved the river near her home, about the stories her mother told her. She didn't speak of pain in sharp detail, only in soft threads that he listened to carefully. Samuel didn't give her empty words. He didn't say everything would be easy. He simply listened, his eyes steady, his hands resting on the old wooden rail. Listening for Nalan was more powerful than promises. It made her feel seen without being judged. In return, Samuel shared little parts of his own past. He told her about how he once lived in a busy town but grew tired of noise and harshness. He told her how he built this ranch alone, step by step, to find a quiet place where life could be simple again. As they shared, the distance between them slowly faded. Two people who once walked alone now shared a silent bond neither of them had planned. One night, after a long day of work, Nalan stood outside the shed, looking at the stars. The sky was wide and endless, just like the night she had arrived. But she was not the same woman anymore. She no longer felt like someone who was just running. She felt like someone who could stand. Samuel joined her quietly. "You look stronger," he said softly. She smiled for the first time in days. "Maybe I am," he nodded. "Good." The wind moved softly across the fields, carrying the smell of earth and distant rain. The night was quiet, but both of them knew that something outside the fence was slowly drawing closer. And yet, in that still moment, there was no fear, only strength slowly building like the steady rise of the sun. For the first time in a long while, Nalan did not feel like someone who was hiding. She felt like someone who belonged somewhere, even if just for now. And sometimes that small feeling can give a person the courage to face the world outside. The air around the ranch felt different in the following days. It wasn't something you could touch, but it was something you could feel. The breeze no longer moved lightly. It carried a quiet heaviness with it, as if it knew something was coming. The horses were restless, the dog barked more often, and even the evening sky seemed to turn gold and red a little earlier, like the world was preparing itself for change. Nalan noticed it too. She felt it in the way the wind touched her face. She felt it in the way the night air made her heart beat a little faster. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived tired and afraid. She was stronger now, more awake, but strength didn't mean she was without fear. It only meant she knew how to keep walking even when fear stood close. Samuel had always been a quiet man, but now his eyes watched the horizon more often. He stood by the fence at dawn and at dusk, looking out at the road that led to the ranch. He didn't talk much about it, but Nalin could see he was preparing himself. Not with anger, but with calm steadiness. One evening, after they had finished their chores, Samuel sat on the porch polishing the lantern glass. Nalin sat a few steps away, braiding her long black hair while the sun slowly disappeared behind the hills. The warm orange light fell across their faces. For a moment it was peaceful. But even peace can feel thin when the wind carries quiet warnings. Samuel looked at her gently. "You can still leave," he said in his calm voice. "The world is wide." "You don't owe me anything." Nalin looked up, surprised. "Why would I leave?" she asked softly. "Because trouble might come," he said, "and this place is small. It's not made for storms." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly. "All my life," she whispered, "I've walked away when storms came. I don't want to keep walking forever." Her words were soft, but they carried strength. Samuel said nothing after that. He just nodded once, like someone who understood something deep without needing to explain it. That night, Nalin stayed awake longer than usual. She sat near the small window of the shed and looked at the sky. It was covered in stars, calm and endless, but far beyond on the road she saw something faint, a flicker of light in the distance like a lantern being carried slowly. Her chest tightened, but she didn't panic. She had expected this. The shadows were coming closer. The next morning, Samuel was already awake when she stepped outside. His hat rested low on his head and his eyes were fixed on the same horizon. He didn't look surprised when she told him what she had seen. "I saw the light too," he said simply. "It means they're near." A quiet wind passed between them. Nalin wasn't sure what would happen, but she knew one thing. She didn't want to face it by running anymore. For the first time in her life, she wanted to stand her ground, not with anger but with quiet courage. The day moved slowly, like time itself was holding its breath. Samuel checked the fences, walked the borders of his land, and made sure everything was in its place. Nalin helped him tie down the gates and hang lanterns along the porch so that the night wouldn't feel too dark. She filled buckets with water, gathered blankets, and set everything where it could be found easily. They didn't talk much while they worked, but their silence wasn't heavy. It was a kind of unspoken understanding. Two people who once walked different roads were now walking the same one, not by chance but by quiet choice. In the afternoon, the sky grew soft and silver. Nalin sat under the shade of the porch while Samuel carved a piece of wood in his hands. The dog lay near their feet, ears twitching at every small sound. The world around them seemed calm, but the quietness was sharp, like the air just before a summer storm begins to speak. Nalin thought about her journey. She thought about the long nights when she had walked alone, unsure of what waited at the next bend of the road. She thought about the way Samuel had offered her kindness without asking anything in return. She thought about how, somewhere along the way, her heart had found a new kind of strength. It was not loud or wild. It was steady, like the earth beneath her feet. As evening fell, the lanterns they had placed earlier began to glow softly. The light wrapped the house in a warm circle like a quiet promise. Samuel sat on the steps of the porch, his elbows resting on his knees, watching the road. Nalin sat beside him, her hands folded together. Far in the distance, they saw them, a few riders slowly approaching along the path. The sound of hooves echoed faintly through the open air. They moved steadily, like people who believed they had the right to be anywhere they wished. But this time, Nalin didn't look away. Samuel didn't say anything. He simply took a deep breath and let it out slowly, as if releasing any fear into the open sky. Nalin did the same. The night settled around them, but their hearts stayed steady. The riders reached the edge of the fence but didn't cross. They paused there as if waiting for something. Samuel stood slowly, calm and sure, and walked toward the porch rail. His presence alone seemed to fill the air with quiet weight. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, as if saying without words that this land was not a place where fear could live easily. Nalin stepped out from behind the wooden post and stood beside him. She didn't hide. She didn't look down. She held her head high, letting the cool night wind brush against her face. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like someone who had to run. She felt like someone who could stand still. The riders and the two people on the porch stood in silence with only the sound of the wind between them. No loud words filled the air. No threats were thrown like stones. Just quiet, the kind of quiet that speaks louder than noise. After a long moment, one of the riders turned his horse. The others followed. Their figures moved slowly back down the road, disappearing into the soft darkness beyond the lantern light. Nalin let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands trembled a little, but not from fear, from the strength it took to stand still. Samuel looked at her and she looked back. Neither of them smiled, but their eyes said everything. They had faced something not with force but with calmness, and sometimes calmness is stronger than anything else. Later that night, the stars covered the sky once more. The lantern still glowed softly, and the dog lay stretched out near the steps, finally relaxed. Samuel sat on the porch and Nalin joined him. For a long time they said nothing. Finally, Samuel spoke in his steady voice. "Storms don't always come with thunder," he said. Nalin nodded. "Sometimes," she answered, "they come with silence," and they both understood what she meant. The wind grew gentle again, moving through the grass and trees as if it, too, had been holding its breath all this time. The fear that had followed Nalin for so long didn't disappear completely, but it changed shape. It became smaller, lighter, easier to carry. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if the road behind her was truly gone, but she knew this night would stay with her forever. The night she didn't run, the night she stood still and let her heart be strong. Samuel leaned back on the wooden rail, looking at the stars above. He had always thought of himself as a man who lived alone, quiet and steady. But now he realized something simple. Sometimes two lives cross at just the right moment. And when they do, they make each other stronger without even trying. The world outside might still carry whispers, but here on this small ranch under this wide sky, there was something stronger than fear, a kind of quiet courage that didn't need loud words. The morning after that silent night arrived slowly, like soft light spreading across a still pond. The air was fresh and clean, and the wide desert sky shone a clear blue. The world around the ranch seemed calm again, as if it had let out a long breath it had been holding for many days. The horses walked quietly in the field, the dog stretched lazily on the porch, and the wind carried the smell of wildflowers from far away. Nalin stood near the well, letting the cool water run between her fingers. She lifted her face to the sky, closing her eyes. For the first time in a long while, the quiet around her didn't feel like something waiting to break. It felt safe. It felt whole. The shadows she had carried for so long seemed lighter now, almost like dust slowly blowing away in the wind. Inside the house, Samuel was preparing tea in his usual steady way. He didn't make much noise and he didn't hurry. That was just how he lived, quiet, sure, and steady. When he stepped outside with 2 steaming cups in his hands, Nalin turned toward him and smiled softly. He handed her a cup without a word. She accepted it like it was more than just tea. In some way it was. It was a sign of peace. They stood together on the porch, sipping the warm drink and watching the sun rise higher. The world outside their fence had not disappeared. There were still people, still whispers, still things they could not control, but here, in this small place between the land and the sky, everything felt steady. "You're quiet," Samuel said in his calm voice. "I'm thinking," she replied. "About what?" She looked at the horizon, her voice gentle. "About how I thought I would always be running. I never thought I'd stand still long enough to see a morning like this." Samuel didn't answer right away. He just let the wind carry her words. Finally he said, "Sometimes a place becomes a home not because you planned it, but because it waited for you." His words touched something deep in her heart. She looked at him and saw a man who had lived through storms of his own, who had chosen a quiet life not out of fear, but out of wisdom. She didn't need to know every piece of his story to understand it. They shared something stronger than explanations. They shared silence that held meaning. Over the next few weeks, the ranch returned to its ordinary rhythm. Samuel fixed the fences and cared for the animals just as he always had. Nalin worked beside him, her hands growing stronger, her steps more confident. She brushed the horses with gentle hands, watered the small garden, and learned the small secrets of ranch life. How to read the sky for rain, how to calm a restless animal, how to listen to the wind and understand what it carried. Each day was simple, but it was not empty. It was filled with the kind of quiet work that gives a person strength without them even noticing. Nalin began to smile more often. Her laughter, soft and bright, filled the spaces where once there had only been silence. The dog followed her everywhere now, as if he had chosen her as his own. Samuel watched it all with quiet eyes, saying little, but feeling a shift in the way the air moved around his home. Sometimes travelers passed along the road. Some glanced toward the ranch, curious. Others waved or nodded as they continued on their way. A few recognized Nalin from the trading post. Some looked surprised to see her standing strong and peaceful beside Samuel. But no one bothered her. The whispers that had once seemed so heavy now felt far away, like old echoes that no longer had power. One afternoon, as she was picking wildflowers near the fence, Nalin saw a group of children walking along the road with their families. One of the little girls waved shyly at her. Nalin waved back, and the girl smiled wide. It was such a small moment, but it felt big in her heart. She had been seen with fear before. Now she was seen with kindness. That alone told her how much her life had changed. As weeks turned into months, Nalin became part of the land itself. She knew where the sun touched the fence at dawn, where the wind was strongest at night, where the horses liked to rest when the day grew warm. She planted small seeds near the porch, and soon tiny green shoots appeared. Each little sprout felt like a quiet promise. Something new, something growing. Samuel often found her sitting at the porch in the evenings, watching the sky turn gold, then pink, then deep blue. He never disturbed her when she sat like that. He knew she wasn't waiting for anything. She was simply learning how to be still. And sometimes he sat beside her in silence because he too understood the beauty of just being. One night, as the stars lit up the sky, Nalin spoke softly. "When I was little," she said, "my mother told me stories about stars. She said they guide people who are lost. She said they don't shout, they just shine." Samuel leaned back, looking up at the stars. "She was right," he said. "I used to look at them and wish I could find a place where I belonged." Nalin whispered, "I never thought it would be here." Samuel didn't respond with many words. He just said quietly, "Then let it be yours." Those words settled deep in her heart like seeds in soft soil. Seasons began to change. The days grew cooler and the nights carried the smell of autumn. The leaves around the ranch turned golden, and the field softened under the warm light. Nalin wore a shawl around her shoulders as she worked, and her hair danced lightly in the wind. She didn't count the days anymore. She simply lived them. One morning, the old woman who once owned the trading post came to visit. She had heard stories, gentle stories, not harsh ones, about the young woman who had found a quiet life on a ranch. She stepped down from her wagon slowly, her kind eyes lighting up when she saw Nalin standing tall and happy. "I knew you had a brave heart," the old woman said, holding her hands warmly. "You didn't run from the world. You walked through it." Nalin smiled and held her hands back, her eyes shining with quiet gratitude. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. Samuel stood nearby, as calm as ever, his hat tilted slightly as he watched them. The old woman looked at him and gave a small, knowing smile. Some things didn't need words to be understood. When the woman left, Nalin stood at the fence watching the wagon disappear down the road. A soft breeze moved across the land. She no longer looked at the horizon with fear. She looked at it with peace. She understood now that the world beyond wasn't something chasing her anymore. It was simply there, and she was free to face it on her own terms. The people in the nearby town slowly came to see her differently. She wasn't the quiet girl who walked away in the dark anymore. She was the woman who had stood her ground with courage. She was the woman who worked beside a kind rancher, building a life from silence and sunlight. Her name became part of quiet, respectful talk, not as a story of fear, but as a story of strength. One evening, as the sky was painted with soft pink and gold, Samuel sat on the porch while Nalin watered the small plants she had grown near the steps. He watched her carefully but silently. The plants were strong now, growing well just like her. She looked up at him with a gentle smile. "It's strange," she said softly. "I came here with nothing. I thought I had no future. But now it feels like I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." Samuel gave a slow nod. "That's how the best things happen," he said, quietly. The stars began to appear above them again, bright and endless. The same stars that once watched her walk through the desert now watched her stand still, her feet planted on a land that had become home. Nalin didn't know where her story would go next. Life was still a road full of turns and unknown paths, but she no longer felt small on that road. She no longer felt like someone being pushed forward by fear. She felt like someone who could choose her steps slowly, wisely, and freely. She whispered softly into the night as if speaking to her mother's memory, "I'm not lost anymore." Samuel sat beside her quietly as he always did. The lantern light danced gently on their faces, and the wind carried their silence out into the wide, starry night. And so in a place she had never planned to stay, with a man who had never expected company, Nalin found what she had been searching for, not in loud victories or grand gestures, but in quiet strength, shared silence, and the steady heartbeat of a peaceful life.